Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Reform UK is preparing for government, not out of hubris nor arrogance, but because Reform is indisputably leading in the polls. Reform has led in north of 100 opinion polls in a row. A poll just this morning from YouGov, one of the pollsters that does actually routinely understate Reform support based on what happens at the ballot box. But nevertheless, that put the Greens now pretty much neck and neck with the Tories, Labour down 3 to 17%, and Reform with a 10-point lead. And of course, if you look at the betting markets, Nigel Farage is and has been now for many months the bookmakers' favourite to be the next Prime Minister. All of which is to say, it would in fact be criminally irresponsible if Reform UK were not preparing for government, should it be the case that we win the next general election. Now, we know for a fact, and have plenty of data to support the notion, that the instruments of state are unfit for purpose. And this has no doubt been a real significant driver of the disconnect, the discontent between voters and Westminster. The learned helplessness that has built up election after election. You know, voters vote for the blue team time and again, and they get the opposite of what they voted for. And frankly, based on a year of Labour government already, we don't need 14 years, we already have a conclusion. You vote for the red team and you get exactly the same thing, just faster. So we know that there is a real problem inside the machinery of state. We already have some ideas about how we're going to address that. But this work, while it has started and it's in full flow, has much more to go, most likely several years to go, and we are going to need help. One of the interesting things that I saw this morning was a chart in The Economist, which showed, for example, just to put some meat on the bone of what I just said, we have a black hole. We keep hearing about these black holes in public finances, and there seems to be an endless supply of hard-earned taxpayer money that seems to go into state apparatus. Yet there was a chart in The Economist that laid bare a massive challenge for this country, which was, since 1997, productivity in the private sector is up about 45%. Now, that's still a lot less than, say, the United States of America. The productivity growth in this country basically stalled after the great financial crisis, but 45%. Productivity growth in the public sector is essentially zero in that time. And that is despite, think about what's happened since 1997, the advent of the internet, automation, AI now. So, and that chart does not even do justice to the catastrophe of this situation. Because, for example, if it was a business, the asset that's doing really well generally gets more capital, and the asset that's doing really badly gets less. It is the opposite in politics, right? So we have to ask ourselves serious questions about why so much of the state is underperforming so catastrophically. And I'll leave you with this. Probably the most apt summation of what we saw over the last few days with this illegal migrant who committed a sex offence and then was apparently accidentally let free is that the British state's descent into being a Monty Python sketch is complete. And if anyone has any doubt that Britain is broken and that Britain needs reform, one need look no further than that. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the main man today, Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. It's very good to see you all. So a lot of my old friends from the think tank world here today, including Tim Knox, my first boss, in Tufton Street out in force today. So good to see you all. I'm going to start by risking a metaphor. And people keep asking me how I feel having left the sinking ship of the Tory party. And I feel pretty good. We are riding high, the wind is in our sails. I'm on a ship that is actually going somewhere. And of course, as we all know, Reform is a bit of a pirate ship, led by a buccaneering, charismatic captain, an ill-disciplined crew, sometimes badly ill-disciplined, but a powerful ship with a dangerous broadside, a terror to its rivals. Now, the job of Zia and Nigel and Richard and me and our colleagues is to help turn this pirate ship into His Majesty's Royal Navy ship of the line, ready to enter the King's service and serve our nation. That is our job, and it's a serious job. And yes, Reform believes that politics can be fun. But the people I've met since joining this party last month are deadly serious. And I was at a street stall this weekend. David Bull, our chairman, organised a national membership drive, and we had stalls across the country. And I was at one in Wiltshire. And one of our activists said to me about Labour and the Conservatives, he said, they call themselves the grown-ups, but they're not. They're just playing at politics. We, Reform, we need to be the real grown-ups. We need to actually take charge of the system and make it better and make it work for the country. And he was right. So, let us start with the problem. And polling and focus grouping and door knocking and all of our personal experiences confirm the state of Britain in 2025. Nothing works properly. It's impossible to build anything. The streets are dirty and unsafe. Taxes and prices are far too high. Immigration is changing our country for the worse and far too fast. And we are becoming poor, sick and unhappy. There is a malaise over Britain. And these problems are complex, but the effective cause of them is simple. Since 1997, we have had governments that, firstly, don't share the attitudes of the country they govern. And secondly, they aren't properly in charge of the state. So we will change that. Reform UK will be a government of national preference, preferring the ideas, the institutions and the people of the United Kingdom over the ideas, institutions and citizens of elsewhere. And we will restore the basis of our democracy, putting ministers properly in charge of the government and answerable to Parliament for their decisions. So let me set out what we will do if we win a majority. And I want to briefly discuss four things this morning. The first thing is this. We will be ready. When Nigel Farage walks into number 10 as Prime Minister on the day after the next election, I don't want the Cabinet Secretary to welcome him in like the latest short-term tenant of the building, sit him down for a briefing on the House rules, and then politely ask if he'd like to change anything about the decor. I want Nigel and his Cabinet to sit the civil servants down and tell them the plan. And the plan is going to be a lot bigger and more structural than a few pieces of decorative legislation. So we are working with policy specialists, with lawyers, with parliamentary draftsmen, and with a whole range of former and serving officials who are helping us plot a path through the thicket of Whitehall and parliamentary process. If we win the election, we will have legislation drafted and ready to go, a new ministerial code and civil service code drafted, orders in council prepared, people lined up for key appointments, and it will all start on day one. So the first thing is we will be prepared. The second thing that we will do is to grip the civil service itself. It is simply not acceptable, and Reform UK will not accept, that ministers have to take advice from and trust the execution of their decisions to officials who answer to different bosses than them and whom they cannot, when they need to, quickly remove from their posts. So we will bring more expertise, advice and executive capability from outside government to serve in Whitehall. We will reform the Civil Service Code to ensure that officials at the top of the civil service, and certainly those at the centre of government, are directly answerable to politicians, including for their jobs. And let me be very clear, the growth of the civil service will be reversed. Now, after falling in the wake of the global financial crisis, the headcount of the civil service rose again after Brexit. Shame on the Tories. And it passed 500,000 in 2003. So we put the civil service on notice that under a Reform government, we expect the headcount to fall dramatically. And it won't be like last time under the Tories, when they reduced numbers and froze pay, and the civil service just gave themselves all promotions, up the pay scale, and therefore pay rises, and we ended up with a bigger wage bill than before. You can see there this absurd transformation of the shape of the civil service from a pyramid to basically a pillar, with more people at the top than at the bottom. So that has got to change. And as we do that, as we cut the system, cut the headcount. We can do something else. And this is another thing I hope the civil service will be ready for if we win power. In the last 30 years, as the size of government grew, so did its physical footprint, both beyond London and Westminster. Britain used to administer an empire from a couple of buildings grouped around Downing Street. In the 1820s, Sir Robert Peel ran the Home Office with 17 officials. Lloyd George delivered the People's Budget in 1911 with a treasury of 26 people. And of course, in those days, Westminster was a residential district. Now, in 2025, it's a wasteland of acronyms: the MOJ, the DWP, the DFT, the DFE, the DHSC, the MHCLG, all housed in these great glass and steel towers, mostly empty, because everyone's working from home. So if we look at this map here, you can see at least 5 buildings whose leases are all coming up for renewal before the end of the next Parliament. And a reform government will not renew those leases. There's something in the region of 100 million of annual savings right there, just in those buildings. £500 million over a 5-year term. So a more concentrated government machine will be cheaper, leaner and more accountable to ministers, Parliament and the public. And our ambition is to make Whitehall Whitehall again, to restore the civil service to the street called Whitehall. So I've explained that we will be ready for government and we will take back control of the Whitehall machine. The third thing we'll do is this. We will make sure the wider system outside Whitehall also respects the mandate of the government. Nigel Farage will not let established conventions or vested interests or bogus appeals to higher authorities than the will of Parliament get in the way of the plan that has been accepted by the public in a general election. We want to restore the proper basis of our democracy, whereby public servants answer to ministers who answer to Parliament. We don't come with a chainsaw or a wrecking ball. We respect the institutions of the country, the armed forces, the police, the church, the judiciary, and we respect the professionalism and expertise of the people who work in them, so long as those people respect in their turn the right of Parliament and of ministers to make the rules they work by. That means ensuring the House of Lords does not obstruct legislation passed by the Commons. It means stopping public sector unions, sabotaging the reforms the public rightly demands. And it means exiting international legal conventions and changing the rules on judicial review that allow judges to countermand the decisions of the government. The price of judicial independence is that the courts should be genuinely non-political, without the power to apply their own notions of what the law should be, let alone to block or reverse decisions rightly made by the government. That is the real rule of law, the independent application of laws made by Parliament. So to recap, we will be ready for government, we will grip the Whitehall machine, and we won't let the wider system stop us. And this is my fourth and final point. The institution we respect the most is our sovereign Parliament. International law and the civil service and the quangocracy and the trades unions, they are not there to second-guess the government. But Parliament is. Now, Reform UK is not best pleased with the current Parliament. Yet, what was Brexit for? What are our elections for, if not to establish and empower our sovereign Parliament? Reform UK will restore parliamentary government. That means using its existing powers, as Nigel suggested we do yesterday, to set up a proper parliamentary commission to look at the grooming gangs. And it means restoring the role of Parliament as the proper legislative body of the country. Our immediate priorities require legislation that, backed by our election mandate, we will pass as fast as we can. But alongside this rightful urgency, we will reform Parliament to ensure it does its proper job to scrutinise bills and hold the government to account on behalf of the public. Let me finish with a call to action. We need help now as we prepare for government. Zia, Yusuf, and my parliamentary colleagues and I are setting up a series of advisory groups and sounding boards to gather insights into how things work and how they need to change. I'm publishing a blog today setting out what I've been saying in greater detail. If you feel you can contribute publicly or privately, please get in touch with us, because I can't stress enough the weight of responsibility, the importance of the mission that Nigel, Zia, Richard and the rest of us have taken on. The fundamental reason that people are increasingly backing reform is because they believe us when we say we will bring change. In 2016 with Brexit, in 2019 with Boris Johnson, people voted for change, but they got chaos and stasis, crisis and drift. The current government came into office promising change, but everything has carried on as before, indeed worse. And I'm not sure our democracy can stand another government promising change and delivering failure. I know Nigel Farage is determined to be different, but to help him be the Prime Minister the country so badly needs him to be, we need the country's help. So if you want to help get the pirate ship reform transformed into HMS reform, ready to govern, then please join us. Step up, step forward, get involved. Britain needs reform, and reform needs you. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone, so we will now go to questions. We've got media here. We've also got a number of think tanks who I'm sure have interesting questions to ask Danny and myself. So let's start with Harry Farley at the BBC.
Thank you very much, Harry Farley from the BBC. Danny Krueger, you talked about making sure the House of Lords respects the Commons. Can you set out a little bit more detail? Are you talking about House of Lords reform, wanting to limit the amount of times that peers could make amendments to government bills? Could you set out a bit more detail on that? And secondly, you were once quoted as talking about wanting the creative destruction of public services. Are you now talking about the creative destruction of the British state?
Thanks, Harry. Well, on the Lords, I mean, there's a huge job of work that we want to do in a very methodical way about planning our legislative programme and then thinking about how that's going to be sequenced in terms of introduction and passage through Parliament. But yes, the principle will be, and of course, as you know, with an election mandate, the House of Lords acknowledges the will of the Commons. So we are confident that with the reforms we might have to introduce, including the creation of new peers, because obviously there's going to have to be some reform Lords created. And we'd like the Prime Minister to get on with that, actually, and start doing that in this Parliament to reflect the reality of public opinion. But we're confident that with the Salisbury Convention, also with the judicious use of the Parliament Act as necessary, and with the recognition that ultimately the Lords are secondary to the Commons, we're confident we'll get our programme through. Yes, so creative destruction. 20 years ago this year, I think, blame Tim Knox, who was at the CPS, leading the CPS at the time, where I made that ill-advised remark. I mean, speaking seriously, we do need Schumpeter, who's responsible for that concept of transformation, which includes some institutions falling away as new ones grow, and that is indeed what is needed on a quite a programmatic scale. But I do want to emphasise our mission is to be as well. We're trying to restore the government. We're not here with a wrecking ball. We're not Leninists. We don't want to wreck the British state. We actually want to make it work. We want to make it functional. But there is going to be quite radical change. So that's the balance we're going to strike.
Cool. Let's go to Jasmine at ITV News.
Mike, over here.
Thank you. Jasmine Cameron-Chaleshi, ITV News. Just on today's announcement, yesterday 5 Reform councillors in Kent were expelled from the party for, quote, bringing it into disrepute. What do you say to critics who question how the party can bring about civil service reform in government while it appears to be struggling on a local level? And just to you, Mr. Krueger, since joining the party last month, your colleague has been embroiled in a racism row. There's concerns about the running of reform-led councils. Do you think you might have made the right decision in defecting? Are you proud to be part of the party? Thank you.
So on the councils, I mean, look, it's quite right for reform councils to be scrutinised. That's totally fair. I think what's interesting is that there appears to be a level of scrutiny on local government all of a sudden that certainly I've never seen in my lifetime. I'm amazed. I can't remember the idea that Labour and Tory leaders were never asked about any number of utterly shambolic councils that they had presided over. Should we talk about Thurrock, which had to go into an S114 bankruptcy process and had to then get a £600 million handout from the taxpayer as a result of, I mean, to call it shambolic mismanagement would be an understatement. Should we talk about Slough? Should we talk about Croydon, both of which had to go into bankruptcy processes? And look, voters are smart enough to know that the statutory demands placed on local councils by central government, over which I'm afraid local councillors of any stripe have no ability to change the parameters of. These are all things that do need reform. We can't do those things until we're in Westminster. Look, we make no apologies for being a party that wants to get things done. And I put it to you that if senior party representatives from the Labour Party and the Tory Party had questions about every single councillor that did something that they didn't like, these press conferences would go on all day.
And I'm absolutely convinced I've done the right thing in terms of switching. I've been hugely inspired by the people I've met in Reform. This is a serious party taking its job seriously, and I'm very encouraged by that. And as Zia says, obviously any party, particularly one that's getting such scrutiny at the moment, is going to have its bad days in the media. But I actually think the story of the last couple of weeks is of continued rise in popular support. And as we're saying today, we're starting the process of setting out serious plans for government, which we're doing in the open, by the way. We want to be very clear to the public and to the civil service and the whole system of what is coming, so that nobody can claim they were blindsided when we get into power. So I'm very encouraged by the work that the party's doing. I'm very pleased to be with them.
Okay, Alex from Sky News.
Hello, Alex Culbertson from Sky News. Reform has said it wants to use the councils it has won to show how it will govern. But you've had many councillors expelled and suspended, some have resigned, and some councils are looking to increase council tax by 10%. How will you turn that around to show voters you really could govern from Westminster and it's not going to be like it is at the moment with the councils?
Well, the Reform councils, Reform control 10 councils, and that's been the case for under 6 months. Right? So that's the first thing to say. And if you were to look at, let's take Kent, for example, which is the one that people often want to refer to, Kent has already announced north of £60 million of identified savings. They've achieved that in under 6 months. By my reckoning, that is the largest amount of savings ever found by a council in the United Kingdom outside of an S114 bankruptcy process. I think that's pretty good going. The other point to make is that these councils have been underfunded and appallingly run for an enormous amount of time. I'll give you another data point on this, which never seems to make any headlines, but there are north of 90 councils in the UK that have raised council tax by more than 5%, not 5% or more, but by more than 5%, of which 0 are Reform councils, 40 are Labour councils, and about 35 are Tory councils. And again, the level of scrutiny, it's one thing to scrutinise Reform councils, more than happy with that. That is perfectly fair. But this insane expectation that Reform are going to totally transform local politics in any given region inside 6 months was always for the birds.
Should we take a couple of questions from think tanks, and then we can come back, or from other guests here, and then we can come back to the media list we've got. Tim Knox. It's better be nice.
Thank you for the acknowledgement of ancient history. In terms of civil service reform, do you think that the Cabinet Office, which claims to act as the corporate headquarters of government, should be the first target of reform?
Thanks, Tim. I mean, that definitely is a question we're pondering, how to reform the centre. And, I mean, I noticed, having worked as a civil servant and in Number 10, how, as a political advisor, how significant in everybody's world in Westminster the Cabinet Office is. And I don't think the public even know it exists, largely. I mean, it's this mysterious kind of brain of Whitehall. And it is clearly dysfunctional, and Number 10 is an appendage of the Cabinet Office. I mean, functionally, it's a subsidiary department of the Cabinet Office, which, in a sense, tells you all you need to know about how power operates in our country. So we can't make commitments yet on that, but we're very conscious of the need to streamline the centre and essentially ensure that the reins of government are properly held by the Prime Minister.
All right, let's go to Genève at the Daily Telegraph.
Hi, Genevieve Hollallen at the Telegraph. First of all, roughly how many civil service jobs are going to be cut? You may not want to give a precise number at this stage, but are you looking at hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands? And secondly, to Mr. Krueger, you were, when you were still in the Tories, one of the most vocal opponents of the terminally ill adults bill. Would you want to see the reversal of that bill to be part of the Reform Manifesto in the next election? Thank you.
So on the number, we're deliberately not giving a number, tempting as it is, to get a headline, because we are proceeding in this in a responsible manner. We want to design the function of Whitehall and then its form and then its size. So the size will be determined by the form that we arrive at. So what I can confidently say, though, is that we are going to get the overall headcount of the centre of the civil service based in Whitehall back down below the levels it was at before Brexit. So 10 years ago, it was 30% smaller than it is today. So we can at least get back to that size, and I'm confident we can go further. I mean, Zia was talking about the productivity crisis in the UK. It is absolutely shameful that in the age of the internet and of AI, public sector productivity and civil service productivity in particular is still so low. It's not been improved by technology. So we are absolutely convinced that we can do better and make significant reductions in headcount. On the assisted dying, I mean, that is a question for our policy process and ultimately for Nigel. I mean, it's a free vote at the moment, and it feels appropriate for it always to be a free vote. It's a matter of conscience. I mean, I have significant problems with this bill, not simply in terms of the morality of it, but in terms of its actual design and implementation. So I would always be voting against this bill. Where we get to in terms of the reform manifesto, we'll have to wait and see. I'm glad that Nigel voted against the assisted dying bill when it was in the Commons. So that's a good sign. Not everybody did in reform, but that's okay.
Okay, Lucy Dunn, Spectator.
Hi, Danny. Lucy Dunn from The Spectator. You talked about structural reforms and things like reducing overall headcount in the civil service. How would you face down potential obstruction or pushback to this by unions?
By the unions? Thank you. Well, I mean, there's a huge challenge there. We absolutely have to get union law right so that public servants are required to deliver for the public. And there'll need to be a programme of change in that space anywhere across the public sector, but particularly around the unions as well, around civil service unions as well. However, I am confident actually that the law, as both it currently stands and how it could be amended, will ensure that civil servants do what they are asked to do. I mean, ultimately, while I'm very, very conscious of the obstructions we may well face within the machine, which are real, and there will be malevolent actors of bad faith who are trying to stop us from doing what the public want us to do. Overall, most civil servants genuinely do want to support the government. They just have the wrong idea of how to do that. And their incentives and the promotion structure lead them to answer to civil servants who, not to ministers. So I'm confident that if we change those systems and those incentives and the system of promotion, we can get the civil service as a whole under control. But it will not be acceptable for unions, as happens currently, or Home Office officials, immigration officials, and their contractors, invoking their own sort of independent political judgment to frustrate what ministers are requiring. So we're very conscious of that danger, and we'll take steps to avert it.
Mary Novick, Financial Times.
Hello. So you can clearly make some savings on people, but the real savings surely comes from stopping to do things. So what core functions should the state stop doing? That's my first question. Yep. And then my second question is, what specifically, and this can go to either of you, what specifically is it about overrepresentation of black people in TV adverts that you think is a legitimate concern?
So maybe just to address that last one, I mean, look, I did the Sunday media rounds and answered this question. Danny did the media rounds, a lot of media this morning. Nigel did a press conference yesterday where the majority of the questions, despite the topic of the press conference being about our proposal for the rape gang inquiry, the majority of the questions were about that. So look, I will give this answer, and then I would ask that we stick to the topic at hand today. Look, I have a perspective on Sarah's comments, and not everybody has, because I was chairman of the party at the time. I worked really hard to get Sarah selected and then elected in Runcorn and Helsby. I'm glad I did, because I think she's a lovely person, and I think she's a great MP for her constituency. I think, as she has admitted, her words were poorly phrased and she has apologised quite rightly for that. I think intent does matter, as Nigel has made crystal clear. Intent does matter, and I know what's in Sarah's heart, and I know she was responding, and this is a fact, she was responding to a caller. This wasn't a random outburst. She was responding to a caller, a chap called Stuart, and I encourage people to actually listen to the segment, because Stuart was quite exercised, I think, understandably, about a lack of representation for some people in television advertising and material over-representation for others. And I remember the phrase he used. He said life was starting to imitate art. And it is just a fact that, for example, the number one, I don't like slicing and dicing people in this country into demographics, but a lot of people seem to do it. And if the one demographic more than any other that is left behind educationally in this country by any measurable outcome are white working class boys, for example. We have routinely in this country internship programs, and this is the other issue. You know, the policy response to this is inevitably, whether it was the Tories or Labour, something that compounds the problem and discriminates against those people even more. So you have civil service internship programs to which white people are ineligible to apply. His Majesty's Royal Air Force, that was indicted by its own internal inquiry, if you remember this, in 2021, where the RAF's recruitment processes were condemned as being basically institutionally racist and sexist, discriminating on skin colour and gender. And actually, I want to point out, the head of recruitment at the time for the RAF, to her eternal credit, resigned in protest, saying she would not carry out such policies because she knew that those were racist and sexist policies. I could go on, you know, our security services. The Bank of England have until very recently an internship program to which white people couldn't apply. So look, Sarah's apologised for the turn of phrase she used because obviously it wasn't appropriate. But again, I know what was in her heart and I know she's a good person.
On the question of what functions could be done outside government, that's again a part of the policy review that we're undertaking, and I mean we have specified today and before how much we think functions of the state could be automated. So there are definitely functions that could be given up altogether. But in terms of opportunities for outsourcing, I mean there are some things which are already done well by the private sector on behalf of the public. I mean some prison management is done very well outside the public sector. Employment support intuitively would be better done by businesses than by job centres. So there are parts of current public sector activity which we think could be better done and more efficiently done outside. But that's part of the policy review work that we're doing. Let's go to the think tank formerly known as Reform. Yeah. Do you want to take the mic, Charlie?
Yes, sorry about that.
Can my first question be, you're not considering renaming as Restate anytime soon? Thank you. So, Charlie Pickles, Director of Restate. Two questions, if I may. On the getting greater accountability for civil servants to ministers, does that include you moving to a system where permanent secretaries are directly appointed by the politicians rather than by the civil service system itself? And would that also extend to Director General? So is your kind of executive leadership cadre going to be directly appointed by the people in your description in charge? And secondly, I wondered if you could just say something about, you talked about redoing the ministerial code, and I wondered what it was exactly in the ministerial code that you think is a blockage or a barrier to delivering reform.
Thanks, Charlie. So on the first question, watch this space. We're working out the best way to ensure the fundamental principle, which already is the principle in theory, of course, in the civil service, is that they're answerable to ministers. I mean, nobody openly admits that we have an independent civil service that doesn't answer to the elected government, but in practice that is what we have. So we do insist that, that people who are advising ministers and who are responsible for execution should be answerable to elected politicians, and that means also having those elected politicians have the power to hire and fire. So how we exactly make this work, what will be the appropriate mix of political appointments into the system and career civil servants? And we obviously recognise the huge value of a civil servant, the professional civil service in this country. Nevertheless, we want it to be under proper political control. And then on the ministerial code, I mean, there's a glaring objection that I have to the ministerial code as adapted by this government, and particularly by Lord Harmer, is that it requires ministers to acknowledge international law in their decision-making. So that's an immediate change that we would make to liberate ministers from that obligation. And then more broadly, the civil service code, which in fact is probably the more practically significant bit of sort of government protocol that needs to change. Again, there's an international law obligation in that. All of the nonsense around boycotting and divesting investment in Israel comes from there. The definition of impartiality is too narrow in the current civil service code, so it's defined simply as being party political, which of course they shouldn't be, but there's a whole range of other political affiliations or commitments that civil servants can have and introduce through their work. That why not have a party political label, but that is nevertheless essentially political. So the whole sort of DEI woke agenda that has infected so much of Whitehall will be in contravention of the Civil Service Code that we introduce. So socially controversial political positions will not be acceptable in the civil service.
Max Kendicks.
You miss, was it Noah from the Sun? What did we do here? Can't remember.
Hi, sorry, Max is gone, so it's Daisy Eastlake from The Times. Do you think Trump is to be emulated in taking on the machine of government? And similarly to what was asked before, do you think there's merit in an American-style system where politicians appoint the most senior officials?
So on Trump, I mean, in a nutshell, yes. I mean, I think he came into government with exactly the same analysis that we have, which is that, in his case, the federal government wasn't under the control of the administration, and he has taken deliberate steps to bring it back under control. I mean, the actual individual aspects of his program, obviously, are particular to the US, not to us. Nor do I think we would emulate his style. I mean, I don't know if Nigel plans to be signing executive orders on day one and flinging the pen into a stadium of his supporters. He may. But I think stylistically we'll be more British about it. Nor, by the way, do we want to emulate the sort of the chainsaw analogy of Javier Milei. Nevertheless, we are very serious about making profoundly deep structural change to the system. And yes, the analysis of the analogy with the US is legitimate. And your question about appointments, well, as I've said, I think the critical thing is that whether they are career professional civil servants or they're political appointees, whoever is responsible for providing advice and execution on behalf of government should properly answer to the government that's in post.
Noah Hoffman from The Sun.
Thank you, Noah Hoffman from The Sun. Zia, when you opened this press conference, you said that the Epping migrant was apparently mistakenly released. Do you think there is more to this story, or could you explain what you meant by apparently? And Danny Krueger, your past comments about children being raised by gay and lesbian parents have upset and disturbed a lot of people in the LGBT community. Can you just set out what your position is on children being raised in gay and lesbian households and on gay marriage more widely? Thank you.
Yeah, so look, with regards to the Epping migrant situation, in some ways I was trying to be charitable here to the state, because how on earth a man, convicted of such an egregious, horrific and high-profile crime, A, could be released, and then B, by all accounts, actively trying to get in multiple times, the prison officers handing him money and pointing him in the direction of the station. I mean, at this point, I'm genuinely trying to be charitable. I want to make the point too, because we've talked about civil service accountability, and I did find it really striking and emblematic of our times in this country that the governor of HMP Chelmsford, the prison in question, was refusing to engage members of Parliament and stakeholders, quote, on an individual basis about that issue. What should have happened is he should have been in front of the press very quickly, taking ownership of the situation and answering questions. And we just don't have a culture of that inside this country. And that is a big reason why shambles like this keep happening.
Thanks. I'm not sure what comments you mean that I've caused offence by, but my view on gay marriage and children of gay couples is it's none of my business who people live with, love, and gay parents do a brilliant job, as do many single parents. However, my strong sense is that it is best overall for children to be brought up by their two parents, living in the same home as much as possible, which is the life that most people want for themselves and their children. And I think government policy should be deliberate about trying to support couple stability and strong families. And that is the foundation of a stable and healthy society, which I think is probably the remark I made that has you might be referring to. I do think it's important that government gets behind families and helps couples bring their children up as well as possible, as well as looking after their own elderly parents. So strong families are best for all generations. Shall we go to Matthew Patton from Fix Britain?
Thank you. I'm really struck by your ambitions with the civil service and the state generally. And I think it's also fair to say that I can't think of a single moment in our history where so much influence has been had by an organisation that in terms of its elected officials is quite small. All the focus is understandably on the civil service, but what we're going to be doing, what we're talking about doing, is giving more authority to politicians. And I wondered if you'd also thought about ministers of a reform government and how that might work, simply because many of those are going to be new to the position of Parliament and the Lords.
Yeah, so look, we've already been on the record, Nigel has been on the record saying that not only would a cabinet under Nigel be smaller than it is now. I mean, look, nobody who's been in a serious decision-making meeting with 25 people in has ever seen anything productive come out of it. And during wartime, for example, in this country, the cabinets were much, much smaller because you can't make a genuinely useful decision with 25 people in the room where everybody contributes. So that's the first thing. It will be smaller. The second thing we've been clear about is that we're extremely open, at least. Nigel is extremely open to the idea of maybe around half of those cabinet ministers to not be members of Parliament. Now, that isn't because we don't have confidence in our class of MPs. We are working really hard, and we think we will have the highest caliber group of MPs, certainly in my lifetime in this country. But you know, the kind of people we are looking for, not all of them will want to run a campaign and do constituency work too. There's also the really serious question, in a competitive world, we are competing with countries like China, like America, for example, in certain ways. And you've got to ask yourself, Mr. Besson, the Treasury Secretary, isn't also doing constituency surgeries about the chlorine levels in the local swimming pool. And we have to ask ourselves, is that necessarily the best use of time for people who are holding some of the highest offices of the land? Do we want our Minister of Defence doing constituency surgeries during a time of so much potential risk of conflict with regards to Russia, Ukraine, and Europe? So these are the things that we think about. We're optimising relentlessly and unapologetically for the highest quality cabinet that we've seen in our lifetime in politics in this country. I'm confident that's what Nigel will be able to put in front of the British people prior to the next general election.
And a related point is that they will be ready too. So we've talked about having our plan ready. Well, we need our people to be ready as well. And so there's going to be a programme of support for candidates and future ministers, many of whom, as Zia says, won't necessarily be standing for House of Commons. And we would appreciate help from many of the people in this room to try and support those candidates as they get ready, because we're going to have a huge job on our hands to effectively change the regime of this country.
Caitlin from The Independent.
Morning. That was quite a list of buildings there that you said you don't intend on renewing the leases on in terms of government departments. Has there been some form of calculation done in terms of headcount, how many people you could get into the buildings that you want to send to the civil service around in Whitehall? And related to that, will there be provision within the civil service, if the number of buildings are reduced, to have more members of staff working from home, either permanently or on a mixed basis?
Yeah. So we're very against the working from home model. We don't believe it adds to productivity or frankly, the well-being of staff. So we want people who are doing a job for government to work in government, and we want them to work as close as possible to the centre. If they're accountable to ministers, they should be co-located as much as possible. And so, in answer to your question about the detail, I mean, an interesting fact and an illustrative fact about the way our government works is that it is not possible to accurately identify the cost of these leases or the capacity of those buildings. Nevertheless, we are confident that by reducing the headcount, as we've suggested, reforming the system of government, we will be able to make do without those buildings. There's a vast amount of real estate, and I mean, having worked in Great George Street government offices, the Treasury building, for a couple of years, I'm very familiar with the echoing empty space that Whitehall currently occupies, the same in other government buildings. So actually giving up these buildings will not in itself put a huge number of officials out on the streets. They're not working in those buildings as it is. But we've indicated our intention not to renew those leases, and we are confident that, as I've said, once we've designed clearly our plan for government, what's the legislation, what are the different functions of the different departments, then we can go about identifying which bits of Whitehall real estate should be occupied by the remaining civil servants.
Sophie Wingate, PA.
Hello. Can you give more details on your promise to restore the role of Parliament as the country's proper legislative body? Does that mean paring back the powers of the devolved authorities in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland?
Thank you. Well, that wasn't what I was talking about. I was talking about ensuring it does its job of passing UK legislation in a way that actually adds to the process. I mean, it is a shameful reality that MPs don't like to talk about how poor our parliamentary process is. I mean, Ian Dunt wrote a brilliant book called How Westminster Works, and the chapters on parliamentary bills, particularly shameful for those of us involved in that process. So we think that without creating obstacles for the government's business, because fundamentally with a mandate for change we need to be able to get it through. Nevertheless, there are ways to ensure that Parliament can have proper amount of time to scrutinise legislation and the opportunity to interrogate it. And getting the a real feature of our current system is that there is actually a lot of expertise, particularly on the backbenches in Parliament, both on the governing side and otherwise. And it's very difficult for backbenchers to have be able to inform the process of legislation. It's very much cooked up between the front benches of the two main parties. And like I say, we absolutely insist that our legislation is passed expeditiously. But there will be ways, I think, by using pre-legislative scrutiny, which is an underused facet of our current system, by timetabling legislation well in the Commons, by using select committees and bill committees better, and the report stage of Parliament when bills come back after the committee stage. All of this, I think, could be done better, consistent with our current constitution and our current processes. But we are confident of the legislative plans we have, and we think that it's appropriate for them to be scrutinised properly. Any other think tankers want to jump in before we finish up with the media? No? All happy? Excellent. Go on, Andrew.
Terrible mistake to ask think tankers to speak. Danny will speak. Andrew Hornby, Effective Governance Forum. I'm just thinking, other people have sat where you've sat today from other parties making similar ambitions, squaring up to government, and those plans haven't worked over so many years. And I'm just trying to think, what's the one thing that you've said today that will really make a difference? And I think it's your number two, getting a grip and bringing in external management capability. I think that's the one thing that will really change the culture at the top of the civil service. And just to ask, have you read the Nick Timothy paper on the Home Office?
I haven't, no.
I would just urge every single person in this room to read it. It's on his website. It's the best thing that's been written about dysfunction in government and how to solve it for many years. It's a must-read. And his core point is that the top officials think they're leaders, not managers. Yeah. And that explains so much. And it's not just the Home Office. So if your last... so just as you said, bringing in those experienced external managers, not just from business, from other sectors too, who can drive performance throughout Whitehall, I think genuinely would be one of the things that hasn't been done before and could really help you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. Okay, point taken.
Let's go to Daisy Eastlake at the Times. Oh, okay. Alexander Brown, Daily Mirror.
Hi, Ms. Krueger. Speaking during a membership drive at the weekend, you warned of a kaleidoscope of left-wing parties next election, calling them Hamas-supporting and LGBT-supporting. Can you expand on what support for the LGBT community you oppose, and do you think Hamas-supporting is an equivalence? Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. You do have a kaleidoscope of people who proclaim their belief in gay rights on one hand and then their support for Hamas on the other, or at least for the kind of Islamism in the Middle East. So, I mean, I'm pointing out the incredible incoherence of the coalition that is ranged against us. And I dread to think what would happen if there was some sort of deal after the election which ended up with that rabble in power. So that is the concern I have. And I do strongly believe that if people want actually a sensible, decent, moderate government that believes in this country and in its institutions, that wants good government, but also recognises the need for profound change, there is only one party that can offer that, and that is reform. And a vote for anybody else, I'm afraid, risks this kaleidoscope of catastrophe, which is the other side.
Cool. And one more at the back there.
Yes.
Would you give select clauses a full veto over major appointments by the US style veto?
Listen, we're open to suggestions, but I doubt it, because I think we actually have the right model at the moment, whereby the executive can. We don't have the right model at the moment. We have the outlines of the right model. The Constitution is the right one. It's just been perverted by the current system. So the executive is the executive. It should be appointing its own advisors and officials, people who are responsible for execution. I don't think personally that the process by which the Americans have to put their appointments through the legislature would work in the UK context. I think Parliament should do its job, which is to look at legislation. Government should do its job, which is responsible for appointments. I think. Is that right, Sir?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, as Danny said a number of times, there's obviously a big democratic deficit in this country at the moment. That's one reason why there's so much apathy, so much disillusionment in this country. And so reform is going to be clear about what we intend to do in government, what a Nigel Farage Prime Ministership would actually look like. That's why years ahead of a general election, we're already talking about preparation for government and starting to talk about a reasonable amount of detail, more of which will be flushed out in the coming months and years. And, you know, the other point about senior appointments, you know, we talk about, you know, any high-performing organisation that you could look at, if somebody is responsible for something, they also have sufficient power to hire people, fire people, write checks, you know, and procure within their budgets. One of the things that has characterised, certainly my conversations with former ministers, some of whom are good people. I mean, look, it's not like, for all of my personal disdain for the Tory party, many of the people in it, there have been obviously good people who have been Tory ministers who have gone in to the highest offices of the land and actually tried to do useful and good and productive things for the country and been totally unable to do that, unable to procure, write a check, unable to hire anyone and unable to fire anybody, hence having all of the responsibility with none of the authority, and that's what we're going to work to fix. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate you coming.
Yeah,